Okay, so welcome to the cross-team collaboration fun times number 3. As usual, we're gonna do, well, so first of all, let me bring you to the agenda. We've got 3 really interesting talks lined up, and as usual, I'm gonna run this. So first we'll have the people speak, and if you wish to, at the end, we'll have some questions, and if you want to ask a question, you can just turn on your video and kind of pop up and wave your hand. Before, I was having people leave comments in the chat. I think we've not done that much of that. It's not been as important, so I'm going to just try to say turn on your video. But otherwise, keep your video off and muted so as not to make it harder to hear the speaker. So today we're going to start with a talk on mentoring by Doc Jones, and then Josh will talk about the new Lang Team Initiative process. And I think Felix and Wesley Weiser. Felix, is that right? Or was there anyone else planning to speak? I'm not sure. About driving discussions via post-mortem analysis. I guess we'll find out. And then finally, we'll have at the end a kind of social hour that Jane can talk about, which we tried last time and it was really fun. So any questions about that stuff, or shall we get started? All right. Then let's start. Doc, do you want to come on to the...
Yeah, can I share my screen?
You can. Let me just make you a host.
Okay.
And I will stop sharing my screen. Okay, you should be able to share now.
Is it working?
It is.
Okay. So, hi. We're going to talk about the Rust Mentorship in its amazing incarnation today, and it's my wish for its shiny future. My name is Doc Jones. If I seem nervous, it's because I am. Okay, so Rust Mentorship currently has many forms, as you all know way better than I do. But so there are mentored issues, there's the awesome mentor list, and there's Discord and Zulip, and probably a couple of other that are not on this slide. But what's interesting about all of these mentorship opportunities is that they're designed to be one-on-one, which is great, but there might be a good way to be additive to what already exists. And so I want to talk about mentorship in terms of how it would work with groups of people or cohorts. For one thing, there's an advantage in that I was actually talking to Ernest about this, who is working on trying to create onboarding for people with imposter syndrome. And kind of what we resolved to is that in order for people to take that step forward, the outcome has to be worth the risk. And so that becomes easier when there are other people joining you. You're not on your own. Joining in groups also means that you're easily introduced to other people who are becoming parts of the community. And so you've got kind of a direct connection with them. And also out of this group effort, you have an opportunity to learn and attain proof of your accomplishment by the result. So everybody here will know how attractive this is because we've all experienced social hours, which is people getting together in groups and talking to each other and working on things together and sharing things. And so there's an opportunity not only for great learning experience, for bonding between the members of the cohort, and also continuous sort of accomplishment for for the REST organization. Did I say I was nervous? Okay, so Sean Chin is in the room, and Sean Chin was my instructor for Rust, and he actually ran 2 iterations of this like 4-week class. And what was really interesting, or some interesting observations that he and I both came away from, with from this experience, is that in the first class, there was a lecture in the morning, and then students had one-on-ones with Sean, which initially I thought was like a great idea because I get personal direct attention from him. But the result was that people did not engage during the lecture, and they didn't really talk to each other outside of the lecture or anywhere else for that matter. In the second iteration of the class, Sean decided to use LiveShare, which had all of us working on exactly the same code base at the same time. And so we took turns, like writing code and either, getting correction or direction from Sean. And at the same time, our cohort colleagues could ask questions. And so we were learning from each other and learning from him, and also sharing this ability to learn how to write code. And not only was it fantastic learning experience, but the whole team was engaged more with each other, and we continue to work together and talk to each other today. So the second iteration was wildly more successful. And I realize this is a small sample size, but it was a direct personal experience with how, when you engage like in groups and bond and work together, it can have consequences far beyond just that one experience. Okay, so there actually are already a couple of examples of mentorship with cohorts that I wanted to talk about. One is the writing sessions that Nico ran for getting status quo stories. And those had a bit of what I'm talking about, but not completely. So it was, a very targeted purpose. And there were, it was definitely a group of people that got together, but we weren't necessarily on common purpose because the experts were operating at one level and one set of goals, and the rest of us who are not experts were operating at a different level with a different set of goals. Another example is a project that Nico's running right now called Octopotty. And I think Ryan is aware of this one too. I don't know if he's here. But anyway, there's a group of Rust Padawans who we're working under the tutelage of Nico to get some metrics out of GitHub regarding the Rust organization. And so we don't, sort of like the description of the first Rust class that I had with Sean, this group doesn't really interact together. There's no like icebreaker. We don't talk on Zoom. It's strictly like Zulip and the mentored issues. However, because we are in a group in Zulip, it's kind of like a 50-50 sort of arrangement, if that makes sense. But these 2 projects are at my wish level. Hat tip to Felix. So what is Mentor Sprints? It's a 1-day, 4-hour sprint that was designed by this organization, Mentored Sprints, which I think you have access to the link from the slides. If anybody else wants a link to that, let me know. They have, over the last 3 years, or 4 years rather, they've partnered with various conferences like PyCon, PyScicades, and SciPy to run these in conjunction with the conferences, mainly to drive attendance and because of a lot of the maintainers were already present. So they've got a lot of experience running multiple iterations of this thing and sort of have the organization of it nailed down. So they have two goals. One is to assist contributors becoming contributors and completing their first PR in an open source project. And second is to give a place for maintainers to come and pitch their projects and to solicit more experienced contributors. My favorite thing, I actually attended one of these for SciPy on Saturday. And I have to say, my favorite thing about the experience was this application called Duckly. And Duckly, like LiveShare, is this is like there's a website for Duckly. But what's great about this is that you can share code, you can share your terminal, you can share your screen, regardless of your OS, regardless of your IDE or your editor, which I just found amazing. So this particular screen is being shared through the terminal, but it's a Vim file. So if you use Vim, I'm on VS Code, it doesn't matter. I can work in your code. If I bring up my VS Code, you can work at it, even though you're not using VS Code. Again, just kind of amazing. There's one tab that's available through Duckly that's not here, and that's co-browsing. But sharing the screen, the only difference is I don't have control over your browser. We can't co-browse. Okay, so here's just what it looks like if you're actually using an IDE, and it's a great experience. And this is the sidebar where this is what it looks like when you have this list of projects that are participating in the sprint. It's simple to just go here, click on this, and there's a button down here that says go live. When you select this project, you just hit go live, and suddenly all that stuff that I showed you earlier is on the screen. And I also have the ability to share my code, share my terminal, co-browse, and share my screen. So it's not just the mentor that can do that if it's necessary or it works. So so there's been a couple of discussions. This says pilot, but this is also my dream and sort of wishy talking. So I'm going to call it a pilot. There's nothing. This is like what a pilot would look like if everybody agrees and we can confirm and move forward. I had a discussion with Felix and also Wes, along with Nico, and we were talking about what mentored sprints might look like. And the issue came up of like, okay, so how do I teach people how to fix bugs? And so I sort of created this as an example of what that might look like. This is not in fact a pilot, this is a discussion. But one idea would be, the first step would be to have a pre-recorded video on Rust-C, just describing the system and how things work. And then at the very end of this tutorial would be some way of sharing a message, whether it's through chat or whatever, of how to submit a comment PR showing that they had completed the tutorial. And then they would be eligible for the next step. And the next step would be a live workshop, or actually streaming of a video on various tools that one would need to know about in order to be a successful bug basher. And then at the end, there would also be people present to answer questions in the live chat, but the video would not be live. It would be streamed, pre-recorded video. And then at the end, there would also be an assignment given out for accomplishment for attendees that wanted to move to the next phase. And so they would be given directions on, here's a list of bugs. If you close 3 of these, then, you'll move on to the next stage, that sort of thing. And so then they would be invited to the actual mentored sprint, which would run through Duckly, as I showed you earlier. And they would be able to work with one or two, there's still discussion around like how this work would be broken down in order to actually get all of the videos recorded, and also this mentored sprint staffed. But in any case, so the people who had accomplished their assignment would be invited to a mentored sprint, and then that mentored sprint could also be streamed so that people who are not qualifying but wanted to watch and learn would be able to do that. And finally, a mentored sprint like this could serve as a qualifying gate for participation in actual compiler team sprints. And this is, Nico, do you want to talk about this, or because this is kind of your brainchild? I mean, I can do it, but.
Sure, I could talk about it if you want.
Okay.
So yeah, the idea here was basically that you would pair up. The goal is to kind of produce documentation, right? And one example might be the Rust C Dev Guide. The idea would be to pair up somebody who really knows the code well, and they could kind of do a come in maybe once a month or infrequently and kind of explain how things work and record a video ideally so that that knowledge can be captured and people can watch the video and get immediate value. And then you would have a group of people who are trying to learn how the code works. And what they would do is spend the rest of the time, kind of when they meet, trying to write and produce documentation and understand the code, right? And then that would be something they can produce. And when the expert comes back, they can sort of review what got produced and check, like correct any misconceptions. That was the rough idea. And NaruRimo was named after NaNoWriMo, National Rust Writing Month, I guess. But we had a bunch of crazy names for it, different kinds. But so I'm trying to think I think I kind of covered most of these points. I think, yeah, this is the general idea is to come together and use documentation and trying to understand instead of just fixing bugs. All right.
Okay, so what would be the next steps? So for mentored sprints, if we're gonna, I think that we're gonna move forward with the compiler team. We need to recruit some organizers to handle coordination and communications around the mentored sprint. Ideally, the reason that I had November is because it would be great to leverage all of the attention that Rust is getting around the new edition. I always want to sing that now when I say it because of Nico's video, but I don't dare. So recruit working groups that would want to participate in mentored sprints. So there can be multiple groups going as long as they're staffed. We need to recruit generalist mentors, and their function is if somebody borks their Git history, these people can step in and help out, or if there's some other if there's something wrong with their Rust toolchain, those kinds of sort of generalist sort of errors that people might need help with one-on-one, we need to have some people who are knowledgeable, standing by, or some kind of a help desk sort of vibe, if that makes sense. Again, I just explained the target date. And then we also need to engage with mentored sprints who has all of these tools and experience in delivering these. We don't have to create that on our own. We can rely on them. They consider themselves open source, so there's nothing that they offer that they charge for. And again, relying on their experience with this would be super helpful for us. Next steps for NaNoWriMo. Nico has already volunteered to act as the expert. We would like to recruit an editor, aka a tech writer, who would be the expert's equal and assist with cleaning up or structuring, the expert of the words is what I should say. And then for we need to recruit a mid-level compiler person who can lead the cohort and basically interact with them as they go through their work sessions on a weekly basis. And this person would also be the single point of contact with the expert. So if for some reason we needed them, then the cohort lead could reach out to them. The cohort lead can report on our progress, that sort of thing, but that would be a one source of contact for Nico. We're in very early discussions with some other possibilities here. I think there's been some discussion on Zulip about sort of a larger umbrella for the same process for developing other books. Maybe it was just on the async stream. But in any case, Global Rust Writing Club is what that stands for. And then also Ernest Kisidu will present, he's very interested in presenting mentored sprints as an opportunity for his Rust cryptography industry. So we're looking forward to maybe adding them. And then this would be my cohort mentorship wish, our shiny future, the sun that was created for Neo. And so doing more of a getting to know you style of cohort mentorship, where there would be not only expert to mentee, but also peer mentorship going on, creating easier future collaboration among the cohort members, and continuous contribution to Rust.org. And there's my indecipherable acronym.
Excellent. All right. So I am gonna, sorry, struggling with Zoom. Okay, thank you very much, Doc. I already suggested that we should put the mentoring as a topic for the social hour. So I'm gonna move forward with the agenda rather than take a lot of questions now. But I hope we'll have some more discussion, and I'm particularly interested in, I think this could be a great, we should experiment and try to find cool and new structures for bringing people in at different places. So next on the agenda was Josh. Josh, do you want me to run the sharing?
I would appreciate that. I think I'm in a position where my internet is good enough for audio, but not to share slides or video.
Okay.
If I have any audio difficulties, then I may have to switch over to dialing into the Zoom meeting by phone.
Can you see that?
I'm seeing it.
Go for it. I'll try to track you.
Perfect. Yeah, feel free to just go ahead and advance slides as soon as it seems like that's the topic I'm talking about. So yeah, I want to talk about how we can better scale the Rust language. And to talk about that, I want to go over what that means and what types of scaling we have to deal with. So the Rust community is growing very rapidly. This is widely well known. I don't need to cite the statistics here for how many people have started using and adopting Rust, how many companies, how many projects, and so on. And the Rust development project as well is growing steadily. We're getting more developers on the compiler, on various inputs to the tool chain, on the various pieces of the Rust project. And there may be areas that need more and areas that are growing just fine. But in general, there is a steady upward growth of participation in the broader development of the project. And on the other hand, by design, Rust governance grows quite slowly. At most, it tends to grow logarithmically. So if you get 2 times as many or 10 times as many people in the community or development, you might be adding 1 new team member or 1 new governance team to cover a specific area. And that's at most. Often we expect to grow the governance team little, if any, within a single team, because there are upper bounds to how much coordination you can do. Magical number 7 ±2, or other metrics that mean that if you grow a team too much, you effectively make it non-functional. And this is not actually a bad thing. So going on to the next slide, the point, though, is the governance to community ratio is shrinking rapidly. The number of people in the community for each person in governance used to be a lot smaller than it is, and it is becoming less and less feasible to scale direct conversation with every single community member within the broader Rust community about the development of Rust. And this does not mean we don't really value the ability to coordinate with people and get input and all of those things. And we don't want to become any less responsive, but we need to figure out how we can give people effective answers, effective feedback, and respond to the needs of the community. So the language itself, by design, should grow slowly. And it makes sense that the governance grows with the language. So we're not looking to scale the Rust language to where we are linearly increasing the complexity of the basic language syntax over time. We do need steady growth in the sense that there is no end to the things people may want to apply Rust to, and a language that stops growing starts dying. But it's okay that it grows slowly. But the interests and the needs of the community grow over time as the community grows. And while we may not grow the language at a rapid pace, we need to be responsive to what people need from the language and figure out whether the right answer is new language features, new libraries, new crates in the ecosystem, new tooling, or well-documented patterns for doing things with what we already have. And in that regard, we do need to scale to be able to respond to those interests, to those needs, to the needs of new efforts like making async better and scale better, making other aspects of Rust that have not been nearly as well explored. And that is the sense in which we need to scale. We should not become less responsive to the community, to the needs and interests of the community, to the new things people want to work on. And we want to empower people to have more design work and design authority rather than just investing all of that exclusively with the governance teams. We want the people who are experts in these areas, like the experts in async or the experts in other technologies, to have the opportunity and the trust and the empowerment to work with us, do a lot of design work, and then have us curate more than do the design ourselves. So going on a bit, there are two kind of closely related goals here. We want to make more reversible decisions, meaning that whenever a decision is reversible, we want to go ahead and make the make that decision and move on and always have the opportunity to reverse it later. Including something in nightly Rust is not irreversible. Doing experimental design work is not irreversible. There is no reason we can't let that proceed and let people play and experiment and try things. And on the flip side, the more things we make reversible, the more we can do and the more we can experiment. We have a flag in the compiler for this is a really experimental feature, and you should not mess with it and depend on it, even in nightly Rust, because it might change wildly. This helps avoid the problem where, even with it being unstable, so many people wanted async that the await bang macro-like syntax people felt like we needed to keep that even though it was nightly because so many people had built on it. We're right now only using the experimental feature flag for things like advanced specialization or advanced type system features that very few people necessarily understand and can work with easily. We should more widely use that feature to give people the warning of, this is super experimental. If you're not working on it, you might not want to poke at it. So with that in mind, we want to add a new language team initiatives process that expands on previous efforts and evolves those to make them scale better. And I want to talk about both the process involved and first the roles that go into that process. And so starting with the roles, we have two major roles here. We have the owner of the initiative and the liaison for the initiative. The owner, we invest with a large amount of design influence. Their job is to prepare the menu of design options, to make recommendations from that menu, to show us the analysis and the alternatives that went into those recommendations so that we understand the area, and to do all of the coordination work with others as needed. They are in charge of this area, driving this with other people working with them. We expect not necessarily weekly, but roughly monthly updates on this, unless there's a break or a vacation going on. And the idea here is that they could theoretically be a member of the Lang team. Most of the time they will not be, but they should not be the same person as the language team liaison. This should be the person who is doing the design, doing the selection, working with others, and so on. And this is a substantial investment of time, anywhere from, 4, 8, 40 hours a week, depending on how complex and rapid the process is. Then the language team liaison role, we've previously talked about this role in other contexts. We had a project system, and the liaison there had a much larger and more time-consuming role. Here we are paring that back and saying the primary job is to work with the owner as the single point of contact, provide language team guidance in the form of feedback on the design menu, the need for further exploration or expansion, and in general, is this going in the right direction? Is time being wasted down a line of thinking that won't really be panning out? And then deciding when to escalate things to the full language team design meeting. So any actual design work, any status and coordination work, all of that type of thing, we expect to leave to the owner, with the liaison just being the single point of contact for the language team and the owner being the single point of contact for the project team, the initiative team. So going through the process very briefly, and there's a lot more in the link that was earlier on the slides, and we can pass that around as well. You have an idea, as always. You discuss it in various places as you do today, Zulip, internals, all that kind of thing. Figure out who the right owner is, which may be you or maybe whoever is working in this area and doing a lot of design work and discussion already. Then you take that idea to the language team via, next slide, the language team repository, and file a proposal. We'll have a template, and a language team member can second that proposal, and in doing so is volunteering to be the liaison. So this is a notable change. In the past, we have had people second without also committing to be a liaison, and part of the issue with that was that the liaison was a much larger and more time-consuming role. Now that we expect the liaison to primarily be a point of contact and guidance rather than a partial owner themselves, then we believe that it makes sense to say, if you want to second this, you need to be prepared to do the work within the language team. And then as soon as that gets seconded, without, like, if there are no objections, then we want to go ahead and move forward, because again, this is a very reversible thing. We can always decide that we don't like this initiative after all, or there's an issue with it or similar. And so as soon as that is seconded, we will create a chat stream on Zulip, a tracking issue, a repository if needed, anything else that might be needed. So then, as soon as that's done, people can start exploring the design space, both by like drafting RFCs, drafting text, poking at ideas on Zulip, but also starting to land code under an experimental feature gate. Previously, we have pushed back on the idea of developing code until you have your first draft RFC, except with some rare exceptions. We want to say more often, as long as it's flagged as really experimental, you should get to play an experiment within the compiler, land code, as long as it's behind an experimental feature gate. This helps people get a much better idea of what they should do. So then you finish the development process, you land code that removes the experimental flag, and you feel like the feature is more or less complete. You have some explainer documentation, and you get it marked as feature complete by the liaison when you feel like it's ready for broader experimentation. And then from that point, you stabilize it as usual. You get a stabilization report ready when people have put enough experimentation into this and they understand, here's how the space works, here's why this is the right design that we chose. We're comfortable going ahead and stabilizing it. We have enough experience reports and so on. And then going on to the next slide, the one other thing we want to get out of this is that while we don't necessarily expect the owner to follow all the way through from design to implementation, not everybody who's doing design work should also have to be the person hacking on the compiler to make it happen. We really want the persistent expertise of the owner and others in the initiative sticking around after the design work is done or theoretically done to guide the implementation, to shore up any gaps in the design that are picked up on by implementation, and to serve as the brain trust for future interacting features. The same way we have experts on call for things like const eval and other major areas, types, traits, etc. We want to have more people we can call on to say, hey, how does this feature interact with this feature? Let's get the experts talking. So that is the major thrust of the new initiative process. And at this point, Nico, do you want to do questions now or at the end and in the social hour?
Let's hold it till the end because I kind of packed the
Okay.
agenda.
Okay.
And I want to get through it in an hour. So,
Okay. So I hope
yeah.
that gives an idea of what we've been hoping to change over to in order to scale better and to help guide the process in ways that let people do more design and not just bring things to us as something that we need to solve and design ourselves.
Great. Thank you very much, Dash. And I see some clapping in the comments.
Thanks, everybody.
So last talk for today. Wesley, if you're going to drive it, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. Let me make you host. There you. Okay, you should now be able to share your screen.
Is that working?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool. So Felix and I wanted to talk a little bit about post-mortem analysis. So recently, Rust 152 shipped. In Rust 152, we added some extra incremental compilation validation that looked for errors that had previously been reported in some sort of rare situations that were hard to debug and things like that. And so we added always-on validation for those things. As a result, some pre-existing issues in Rust were discovered, and the net result for users were ICs from the compiler. So that shipped on Friday, May 6th. We discovered the issue pretty quickly after it shipped and users started reporting it. We deployed a mitigation on Monday to disable incremental compilation. Since then, we've been working on resolving issues discovered from this, and we're on track to re-enable incremental compilation in 1.54. So because this was a really high-profile issue, it got tweeted about, we got a lot of issues reported on the issue tracker, a lot of users ran into this. We wanted to do a post-mortem or a retrospective correction of error, whatever you want to call it, to figure out exactly what went wrong and how can we improve things in the future. So Felix wrote up a post-mortem document as a template that we've kind of filled out and gone through in some of our weekly steering meetings. We've used 3 of those Friday meetings so far to hold discussions about the post-mortem. And so, like I said, we really want to understand what happened and why it happened. So part of the discussion is exactly what occurred, what the error was, what the impact on users were, and then the chain of events that caused it to happen. And then the goal coming out of this is that we want to fix our processes so that hopefully we can prevent similar issues from occurring in the future. But we realize that we're not going to be able to stop 100% of issues. So we want to figure out what we can do to mitigate the severity of future incidents from occurring again. And so this post-mortem doc has 9 sections in it. It's kind of long. We're using it to describe the efforts. I'm going to go through these briefly. At the end, the very last slide is going to have some resources on it, a link to the template, a link to the post-mortem doc that's actually been filled out that we've been discussing, and some other content as well. So it bears worth repeating, a lot of the focus here is trying to prevent future incidents, and the focus is on processes to prevent future incidents, not blaming people or things like that. One of the things that came out of this was that kind of at each step of the process that led to the issue, people made very reasonable, rational decisions at every point along the process, but we still had a negative outcome. And so a lot of that was simply due to processes not being in place to help prevent that negative outcome, even though all of the local decisions were correct. So as I said, like, this really isn't about pointing fingers at anybody in particular or contributors or anything like that. We just wanted to figure out, you know, what happened and what can we do in the future to prevent those. And so we kind of want to lay all the cards out on the table and see exactly what happened, and without pointing fingers or shaming anybody or whatever. Because, you know, as soon as we do that, like, one, that's just not really healthy, and two, it's going to hide facts and it's going to just cause us to repeat in the future. So getting to the template. So one of the major sections is kind of just looking back and understanding what occurred. So there's a summary, there's any sort of metrics or graphs illustrating the impact on users for the event, things like, you know, how many issues were filed on Rust like Rust, or how many replies to tweets we sent out did we get, or things like that. A summarization of the user impact, you know, for users that hit this issue, they got ICs, their code wouldn't compile, they couldn't really do anything unless they ran cargo clean and rebuilt their code. And then we also want to look at our response to that. So how did we learn about the issue? You know, if we wanted to have the time to detect the issue, what would we have to do? How did we find a mitigation for the issue? And then how quickly, you know, in the future, what could we do to get a mitigation out faster? And then having a timeline that kind of goes through, when was the initial issue shipped? When was it first discovered? How long did it take before we shipped a patch or a fix or whatever, is also really useful. So then, like I said earlier, we want to dig into why the event happened. The main strategy here is the 5 whys. I'm sure most people are probably familiar with that. But basically, the idea is you keep asking the question, why? You know, why did we ship this issue? Why did things go wrong, et cetera, until you reach kind of core causes for each problem that you talk about. And this typically kind of, each answer, there's a lot of answers to each why, and so you can kind of branch out and explore a lot of different things here. So finally, we get to, you know, how are we going to fix this in the future? And so there's a couple different sections here. There's lessons learned, which are sort of general things like, you know, in this situation, maybe we shouldn't have switched it on so quickly, or maybe we should have been more careful about tracking what release this fix went out in, or things like that. But those are just sort of abstract things. So we can learn those lessons, but they're not necessarily actually going to change anything in the future, which is where corrective actions and action items come into place. And so those are concrete things that we are actually going to do now or in the short or long term to try to implement the lessons learned. So as an example of kind of the 5 whys, one of the 5 why questions we came up with was, why did the beta channel fail to catch this issue? And so part of the answer there was that a lot of users that do run beta only run beta in continuous integration services where incremental isn't really used. And so they didn't catch the issue there. Another answer is that a lot of end users don't actually use beta other than that, like they don't develop with beta because either they like the stability guarantees Stable has, they don't really see any real incentive to use beta, or they depend on nightly features and you can't use those on beta anyway. So then, you know, there's another why don't we incentivize developers to use beta? And so that's, you know, you can continue going further and further down this path. So in terms of outcomes, our 5 whys turned into 21 whys and answers. We had 6 lessons learned, 9 corrective actions, 11 action items. Some of these are pretty large items. So if you are interested in participating in this, or trying to get involved with the compiler team, this might be a good place to help because we could really use help. So overall, I think we're actually very pleased with the results of the process. We've learned a lot. We've had good discussions about the principles we use to make difficult decisions. Like I said earlier, all of the local decisions leading up to this were basically correct, but there were some things missing in terms of process that really caused things to fall through the cracks. So having discussions about the principles we use to make these difficult decisions was really valuable. We came up with some new strategies that we're going to employ in the future to try to avoid similar issues. And then, like I said, there's a link to the template for the postmortem. Felix actually has a longer slide deck with more information about the specific results of this postmortem that might be interesting to people. And then there's also just the raw fingerprint postmortem issue as well. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Wesley. Okay, so let me reclaim host here, if I can remember how. There must be a way. There we go. So that was the 3 presentations we had. I'd like to we have a little bit of time, so I want to open the floor for a little while, either comments about things people said if you want, or let's say 5 minutes, or any announcements or other things that people want to say. Feel free to either jump on video or raise your hand in the chat, and then we'll go from there.
Just a quick thing from me. This Week in Rust is celebrating issue 400 this week.
That's awesome.
I want to quickly chime in with something, just to be clear about the thing Wesley presented. One thing that I can't stress enough is that the postmortem document was super, super helpful for structuring conversation. Like, it really helped us, even though we had 3 separate meetings, and that is a lot of time, like 3-hour-long meetings. It also, I think they were incredibly productive meetings. Like, sometimes those steering meetings, without the structure of a document or a well-written document, they can go off the rails or just not be hard to get engagement. Here we saw super amounts of engagement. So that was a really great thing about it, to have that structure to guide things and have people really digging into those whys and elaborating that branching structure. The drawback, though, is that it's a lot of work. Making that document was also a lot of work. I was told it would be a lot of work, and I did, even with that warning, I didn't appreciate that. So it definitely is a process I would reserve for major events, not for mistakes.
I had a question, actually, following up on that. Do you think that we should do that for every point release, for example?
That is an interesting theory. I would have to review the past point releases to figure that out, I think, whether that makes sense. But my gut is that it might make sense. Like, you would think a point release should be such a major, the way things are right now, point releases seem like they're pretty major events, and thus it would be justified.
Oh, Josh writes +1 for every point release. Daniel, go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask if the intention on the language situation that Josh described is to be extended out to all of the tooling eventually, or is it meant to be only really for the compiler?
So I can answer that one. Initially, we are trying this for the language because we have had specific scaling issues there. It is our hope that a very similar process could be adopted for other programs within Rust, including tooling, including cargo, including libraries. But ultimately, that is up to the individual governance teams, whether both they are having the scaling difficulties that merit having that process, as well as if that process is a good fit. And I would in particular expect that this process, because it was designed almost exclusively for language team needs, will need to evolve as it grows to the full project in order to meet the needs of multiple teams. But we do specifically hope that we can unify this process as much as possible across other projects, other governance within Rust, so that we have kind of a uniform interface for the community to Rust governance, rather than here's the process for this team and here's the process for that team.
Just to add
That
to
makes a
that,
lot of sense. Thank you.
I just would just to add, I think that the shape of the process probably fits pretty well. The details may change. So I think that like the libs team has in a sense been doing a similar process already where you can kind of, I think, Josh, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but any member of the libs team can kind of R+ a PR that lands in nightly, and the barrier comes more around stabilization and so forth.
Absolutely, yes. We have been already adopting the be quick to make reversible decisions process, and very much been going based more on objections than full team consensus until we get to the point of stabilization. I think there are other parts of this process that we are debating within the libs team whether to adopt or not, but that portion has gotten almost universal appeal.
Any final comments or questions? Jane has a reminder to vote or suggest breakout rooms for the social hour. Tyler?
Yes, I had a question about what you just said, Josh. Based on the fact that you're using objections, is there or should there be like a minimum amount of time that an initiative is up before it gets fully approved, or could I put one up and like have someone second it a few hours later and then just move forward from there?
That's a really good question. So something we've been talking about within the Lang team, and this is still something to experiment with, is that time exists largely to give people bandwidth to raise objections and concerns. And so largely speaking, we would like at least enough time to pass that at least one meeting has occurred since the proposal was initially raised. Not necessarily since it was seconded, but from submission to start of experimentation, we hope that at least 7 to 10 days go by. There's nothing, of course, that stops someone from starting to do design work in parallel at any given time. It's just the longer you wait, the less risk that you have. But we, in general, want to allow for a little bit of time for objections. The other thing we have commonly talked about doing is one way to skip that process time is that if you're actually doing something with the whole team involved and you actually get a sign off from everyone on the team, then you obviously don't need to wait for objections, because if everybody has given an affirmative response, you don't really need to wait. So we've talked about that for RFCs on occasion. If you get every checkbox rather than all but 2, then you might potentially drop the 10-day period or lower its length. But that doesn't come up very often, and usually only for things that are passing by a landslide and starting to be worked on anyway.
All right. Jane, do you want to talk a little bit about the social hour?
Sure. So let me see if I can pull up the slides from last time. I don't think there's much to it, but we're going to create a bunch of rooms. It looks like right now we have 3, and then there will be some 3 or 4. Looks like 4. And then we'll have some default rooms where people can just basically hang out for the next hour and talk about whatever they want. It's just it's meant to be an environment for like socializing more than getting work done. So no one needs to be like bringing their A game or their current project or whatever. Just anything you're interested in.
So I'm actually, on that note, I'm going to end the recording. I want to say thank you to everybody for attending, and especially thank you to Doc, to Josh, to Wesley and Felix for presenting. And Jane, I'll make you host and you can set that up. Oh, but I think I have to reclaim host so that I can end the recording. All right.